Welcome to the Circle of Influence webinar series. This series highlights an incredible collection of conversations and thoughtful discussions between Saddlefit for Life's founder and certified master saddler Jochen Schleese and equine professionals that have dedicated their careers to optimizing the health, well-being, and performance of the horses in their care. Throughout this series, you're going to meet a variety of experts, each playing a vital role in the horse's circle of care. At the heart of it all is the horse, with every professional contributing to their physical and emotional welfare, overall health, and performance. A recurring theme in this series is Saddlefit, because a healthy, well-cared-for horse experiences changes in their back, which means regular Saddlefit evaluation and adjustments are essential. Each professional's work influences these changes and highlights the importance of maintaining proper saddle fit for the horse's comfort and performance. Our invited experts come from all areas of the equine industry, from surgeons to nutritionists, body workers, and trainers. They share practical insights, tips, and strategies you can implement to support your horse's health and well-being at home. Join us and explore the full circle of care, because a truly healthy horse is the result of a team of dedicated professionals working together.
Good evening, everybody. I think we'll get started. I'm very excited to be talking with Jochen today. We had a great chat the other day. We realised we're very much of the same mindset, that we want to bring more evidence-based practice into the industry. Basically, we're both very keen on everything being based on science, and also both understanding how interconnected everything is, and how everyone's jobs in the industry are so hugely interlinked, and understanding that there's a much bigger picture regarding everything. We often in our individual jobs get kind of blinkered onto just looking at what we're doing, when actually really we do need to have at least a basic understanding of everybody else's role in looking after the horse. And for me, as many of you will know, I'm studying posture and the relationship with hoof balance, and that's very, very closely interlinked with saddle fit, and we'll talk about those things briefly as we go through. But Jochen, thank you very much for joining us today.
You're welcome. I'm very happy to be on your channel here, and like you said, educate everybody who likes to be educated on evidence-based and not just opinion. As we know, we all have belly buttons, we all have opinions, and there's so many of them. And the poor consumer who really loves the horse and wants to do the right thing is confused. And then comes what is the right thing? And I always said, the poor horse is like the soft tissue between two metal pieces. The shoes on the bottom and the metal on the back. So, of course, you can go and say, hey, we don't use shoes. Hey, we don't use saddles or bareback trees or treeless saddles. But then the fact is, we need to know a little bit more. We owe it to the horses that we choose what is based on evidence and not on opinions.
Absolutely. And Jochen, just in case, I'm sure everybody knows who you are, but just in case, would you like just give a brief introduction as to who you are, and also a bit about Saddlefit for Life? Because I did a course for you guys at Saddlefit for Life, didn't I? Because you have obviously Schleese, you have your saddles, but then you have Saddlefit for Life. So just give everyone a brief introduction into who you are.
Yes. So my passion is horses. I grew up on horses. I rode all my life. Was lucky to had a great sponsor who was an amazing horseman. And before you know, I was on the German team as a 3-day event rider. I'm not here to impress everybody. I'm just saying, as a junior, I was very proud to be sponsored. And my curiosity started when I got this company giving me the jackets and the saddles. Why is that horse going so much better than in this saddle? And of course, there was a very popular saddle. Everybody wanted this. And I finally was good enough to get the popular saddle. But wouldn't you know, the horse got the worst. But back then, from 78 to 81, there was not really any science as much as we have today. Dr. Harrison, professor at Copenhagen, he told me when I went to university, we were even told as veterinarians, horses don't have pain receptors. Today, veterinarians, they have pain scales. And when I got through my education in school, my dad says, what do you want to be? Oh, I want to be a doctor. I want to be a veterinarian. But I spent too much time in the barn and I needed to go to night school to upgrade my scale, my grades. And then, of course, dad says you need to do something on the side. You can't just teach riding lessons. Fine. So I took a trade and I fell in love with saddle making. And my dad taught physics and math. And he taught us kids, the person who knows the how will always follow the person who knows the why. So here I go in my saddlery new trade as an apprentice. And I drove my poor master saddler crazy while saying, why do we do it like this? Oh, just do it because I tell you so. Because we've always done it like that. So I became passionate about Saddlefit for Life because I noticed very quickly there needs to be a big change because education, science did evolve. Now we got, through COVID, so many companies online and we have so many education platforms online. But back in the late 90s, university had the ability to have horses on the treadmill. And the horse running on the treadmill while a rider is on top in the university in Holland in Utrecht. They put a fiber optic camera underneath the saddle in the horse's wither cup, the area where the wither area is. And I saw how the saddle interfered with the horse's shoulders. I cried and cried and cried, and I called my dad. I had to leave the auditorium. He says, Daddy, I know what my calling is. Nobody should lose their best friend from not knowing what they don't know. That's why I made Saddlefit for Life. It's a worldwide platform. We traveled the world for many, many, many years, taught it on site on 5 different continents. Now it's all online with local trainers. And the reason is because my competitive horse, back then when he developed this funny hitch, we tried everything. Of course, we didn't have Yogi back then, but we had different farriers, we had different veterinarians, but it turned out that I didn't listen to my horse. That famous saddle, it went fast downhill because that did not work for my horse. And that's why I said, this is crazy. Everybody needs to know what is now to your fingertips available, but we also need to educate customers with saying, beware, there's a lot of belly buttons out there, a lot of opinions out there. And that's why Yogi and I decided to do this on an evidence-based. I'm doing this for 45 years now, and I'm happy to surround myself with experts just as Yogi. So thanks again for having me on your platform.
My pleasure, my absolute pleasure. Well, having said all that then, would you like to go ahead and let's get started? I'm going to turn off my videos just so my face doesn't get in the way.
Okay, so I do the same thing. So we know through history, and horses have been around the world for 35 million years, and they have evolved from this tiny little horse to hippos to these big horses. And they love living in the herd. They move 20 miles a day, graze 17 hours, and that's where they like to be happy in the big field. So when I look at the hoofs, for example, and why the horse walks so much is the hoofs acts like little pumps, pushing the back up their legs when they move. Now think about this, and I've been one of them. I had the t-shirt. I'm not proud of it, but I was convinced by my trainers that the horse needs to be in the stall 24/7. When you ride him, you pull him out. And very little paddocks. Now today we have better stables and more paddock times, but the fact that the horse didn't really walk a lot, what is must for these animals, here's the reason why, because it helps them, they need to use their feet to walk to help their hearts circulate the blood properly. So all that, of course, helps with the big question, can the horse survive today without humans? Now, this is a sad story, But the reality, no. They cannot survive without humans anymore. Don't take my word. Google it and you will find the reason. If you don't like Google, there's other search engines. You will see, oh yeah, there's a big change because the horse, just like what we did on not just humans, on the German Shepherd, how we overbred them, but also the horse didn't keep up with evolution. There's many, many good videos, documentary movies by experts who spend years living with the herds, years studying the horses, who can explain that much better why the horse cannot survive today in the wild or in captivity without the humans. So if humans must intervene, what's the best approach? Do you follow opinions or science? Well, we made that point already. We do not like to go with opinions. Because opinions, there's many out there, it's overwhelming information out there. And this is what Yogi's and my passion, my dream is. We want to give clarity, confidence, and get this with science. Now, here's a reality. When we have these horses in our captivity, right, and they're not in the wild, we use them for driving, for sports, any kind of sports, Western, English, pleasure riding, you name it. You know, there's this back, the horse's back, where we sit on it. And if you look at history, pics or books, or you go to the Kentucky Horse Museum, you can see where humans used to sit. They started sitting on the croup first. Why did they sit on the croup? Because back then that was the highest point to get the weight off the human's feet. And then you see the old hunting picture where people sit in the middle of the horse's back. And then while we moved on, Caprilli, Italian cavalryist, was mentioning this is a spot where you want to sit. You want to be in balance with the horse. The racing seat changed. You see today the bullfighters, the rodeo riders, the bareback riders, the hunter-jumper, all the riders sit at a certain spot where the horse and rider align. And when I mention that, think about you sitting on a drum and floating down a river on an oil drum. Soon as you lean a little bit to the right, you fall in the water. Too far forward or back, your balance is off. So your noggin, your head, pretty heavy thing. So as soon as this is off, the horse really has to struggle to balance you. And the saddle, the interface between the two beings, has to kind of compensate for that somehow. And of course, where yoga goes more to the feet, how the horse has to balance himself on the feet. So often when I work with farriers, they said, oh, I can see you change something on the saddle. I can see all the horses move. And I can measure if it's a very simple device or if it's my scanner, I can see how the back of the horse changed when the farrier changed the approach, how he trimmed the horse. What else changes? You know, what type of riding? Do I ride the horse in a hyperextension hollow back? Right? Do I ride him round? You know, what type of saddle fitting do I believe? Do I believe on this saddle fitting or that saddle fitting? Because we got to be reality here is there's 3 different approaches to saddle fitting, which I cover later. So then we have the nutrition, veterinarian, physiotherapist, osteopath, farrier, of course, massage therapist, and so on and so forth. All of this circle of influence changes the 3-dimensional shape of the horse's back. Why is that so tricky? Why is that so difficult to align balance? Well, Yogi and I believe strongly, without being too tunnel visioned, there's a lot of soft tissue between the shoes of the horse and the saddle. And by educating clients, you know, and understanding, you know, proper hoof, health and balance, and that's where we come in the circle of influence. Yogi, do you want to chime in here a little bit and give me a break to get a glass of water here?
Yeah, I can come in there quickly. I want to go back to his Jochen's original slide about the horses in the field and the reality of what we how we keep horses in the domestic setting. And I'm going to go into much more of that in my later slides. I wasn't expected to come in here, so but I want to add to the circle of influence. If in the circle of influence before, Jochen had all of the different practitioners, but the circle of influence also includes the horse's environment. And last year I did a series of webinars on ethology, on understanding the natural habitat, the natural species appropriate way of living for horses, and how we have massively obviously changed that with keeping horses in the domestic setting. And that also has to become part of the circle of influence. And part of the bigger picture that we're going to talk about today, and that we have to really consider, is how much the way we keep horses is affecting both the farrier and the saddle fitter, because of the things in the middle here, because of posture, because of how it affects posture, how it affects biomechanics, and those things affect performance, welfare, and long-term health. So as we go through, we always have to remember a bigger picture. And this is why I'm very passionate about stepping back and seeing bigger pictures, is because as much influence as I can have on hoof health and balance, and as much influence as Jochen can have on back health and saddle fit, there's a whole big piece of the puzzle, which is domestication. And the more we can understand how we should keep horses, and I would refer people back to that series that I did, the more we can understand that the owner and the environment have just as much influence on the horse as what myself and Jochen might have, and any of the other practitioners. So we have to add environment to the circle of influence, and I'll talk about a little bit more about that when I come to my slides later. But again, it's about stepping back and seeing a bigger picture, and that's why I really like the fact that Jochen started with a slide of the horses in their natural habitat. But I think people don't often realize how much that affects posture and biomechanics, and how therefore posture and biomechanics affect performance, welfare, and long-term health. So yeah, like I said, I'll expand more on that as we go through. So I'll let you carry on for now.
Well, I was hoping that you mentioned that, Yogi. Thank you very much, because that leads into this next slide very much. And throughout my travels, and I understand you still travel all around the world as well, I have met many people, and one of them is people who lived with wild horses, observed them. And sometimes we get horses in the horse shows here who are Mustangs, who are being captured later on when they were already matured. I would say we have documentation, over 260,000 measurements on file. I'm kind of a pack rat, never threw anything away. And back then, before the computers were really active, there's a lot of boxes around my facility. But I can say the very few horses, let it be 100, 150 Mustangs, I yet have to measure an uneven Mustang. And that really started me going. And I'm glad that you mentioned that. It affects hugely the posture of the horse, how we keep the horses. And I seen it, sure, you could see it in the measurements, says, oh, you didn't measure right. But today we have measurements pretty easy. Everybody can take it. You can even take it on your phone. And you can see that not just with your naked eye, but you can see it with measurements, how even or uneven the back is. So when we talk about the back, this is where I come in, the person who needs to balance you, okay? Or everybody who is a saddle fitter out there who needs to balance the rider when they're asking, oh, my saddle is off, I'm feeling crooked. So we need to start first, where does this crookedness come from? And why are there so many horses crooked? There is many theories on the market. And I'm glad, and I can't wait to hear Yogi's slides and explanation later. So On the left, you see a horse, mane goes to the right. Yes, it has some white marks on the withers, but you can see also the sweat marks of the saddle. The sweat marks of the saddle, it's an easy test to do. See, English saddles, for example, never needed a numb-down or saddle pad. It was just there to protect your saddle from getting dirty. Now, of course, we have all kinds of different saddle pads, but in reality, the English saddle doesn't need one. So you could ride your horse without a numb-down or saddle pad for less than 8 circles, walk, trot, canter each direction, and take your saddle off. The saddle will be fallen into a way, and you can see if it sits symmetric. But before you do it, stand from the back, like I did here, and look at the horse's shoulders. Okay, and look at the mane. There was an old handbook in the German cavalry. They actually used Colonel McClellan's guideline, because he says on his McClellan saddle, use the cinch on the side where the mane falls 1 inch more forward. And if you know the saddle, the rider or the soldier had the ability to move the cinch or girth straps in a location, left and right, not symmetrically, purposely more forward on the side where the mane falls. On the left picture, the mane goes to the right. There would that cinch would be 1 inch more forward. I'm coming back to it in a minute. Why? On the second picture from the left, you see the mane goes to the left and then to the right again, and so on and so forth. So now look, after you looked at the mane, look at the 2 right pictures. On the horse, okay, the neck is not very straight there on the picture on the right, but you see clearly a hugely right shoulder, mane going to the left. On the second picture from the right, the mane goes to the right and hugely bigger on the left shoulder. Now there's many experts, not just farriers and saddle fitters, but also biomechanics specialists such as trainers, riders, veterinarian body workers, who have stated that the majority of the horse's mane goes to the right. So if you have 10 horses, go and count. You will see 70% of the mane goes to the right. Yes, also in Australia. And 2% or 20% of the mane goes to the left, and only 1% goes left and right symmetrically. I'm not saying breaking halfway down the neck, where the top part at the pole goes to the right and the withers goes to the left. Funny enough, most manes on Mustangs split in the middle. Interesting fact. So we need to figure out, why are so many horses crooked? You know, and some people say it's a birth trauma. You know, as I said, there's many veterinarians, there's many specialists around the world who have studied and claim this is one of them. I have taught at the osteopath school in Germany, and they said, just like humans, the horse appendix is on the right. There's a reason why in vaulting, gymnastic on horses, horses only go through the left. You will never find any competition in the world where the horse gets launched to the right. They only go left. Ask the majority of the trainers who train young horses. They always say the right lead canter is harder than the left lead canter. We also know that the left eye is the more dominant eye. And the people who lived with wild horses have stated, when the stallions fight, they guard the right side. They guard the blowy appendix side. They fight more from the left. So we're seeing the left coming up. I was made to believe that, oh, we mount from the left because the soldier had the sword on the right. That's why we mount from the left. Do you really think the racing industry cares if there was a sword on the right? Why do you think the majority of the horses go through the left? Could it be something with the digestive tract of the horse? Let's look at this while we speak from racing. You know, in the nature, the horse doesn't get loaded with artificial weight from the rider, right? So the horse's skeleton can mature until he's 6.5 years old. We in the Western world or English world sometimes ride the horse when they're 1.5 years at 2 years in competition. Look at it. At 2 years, that's 24 months, or when they start at 1.5, right? How far is the the skeleton really developed. It's unbelievable, right? So in Germany, we call the horse from 3 to 6 Remonte. Remonte means a young horse, which we need to not ridden every day, but with the certain competitions, sometimes the horses get driven very fast in a very young world. And now you have, if it's shoeing, if it's saddle, bad equipment, what does not change, if it's carbon fiber, steel, metal, even treeless saddles can deform the saddle. This is a picture I found from a book called Proper Movement Balance by Tony Gonzalez. He's the 5th generation farrier from Hawaii. And I could not believe when I read that in 1986 the first time. Now, I know at the training scala in riding, number 5 is straightness. I got to be able to ride my horse so the horse travels straight. How can I do this? Oh, I can do shoulder in, renvers, travers. I can do all kinds of things. I make the horse straight. I can lunge a horse straight. I can do body working, make the horse straight. Yes, if it's tissue. But look at the red arrow on the right slide. That upper arm is deformed. Your kid, your child will be deformed too when you put heavy backpack on that child and that kid has to walk to school. And now that backpack hangs crooked. That kid gets scoliosis. No matter what you do gymnastic-wise, the scoliosis, the bone structure is hard to change. Now, we've seen it when I was in Sao Paulo in Brazil. There is actually Dr. Solange Miguel showed me a case, the horse was still alive, where they're trying to straighten the bone. Needless to say, after a year they had to euthanize because all the other joints and bones compensated. The fact of the matter is we need to deal with the unevenness of the horse's body when we're dealing with putting the rider on top, and we want the horse to last for a long time. So if it's muscles, yes, we can train it as the trainer body workers. If it's bone structure, we got to deal with it what it is. One of the best conversations I ever had when I did a saddle fitting demonstration in England, he looked at me and says, you know what, I'm a team vet and I'm looking at the cross country and some of the horses are so crooked, but they're not lame. They're totally okay. So if we have a deformity in our body, we don't euthanize ours, right? We find a way to compensate. Dr. Kerry Ridgway, and this is, I'm sure Yogi will address this as well, or go a little bit more in detail. I'm just showing some slides to show why and how many different experts talked about the unevenness. The high heel low syndrome is a common knowledge under the experts. And interesting fact, he estimated that 60% of horses show asymmetry in the heels. And if we look, this is a veterinarian who was a chiropractor, acupuncturist, and worked very close with many, many farrier. So when I read that, I remember my horse. I grew up on little horses, and my horse we bought him when he was trained, my first competition horses, but he needed very special shoeing. He had a special angle. And I moved to a different part of Germany. The farrier said, it doesn't need it. Just shot the horse. Didn't even walk the horse. I wasn't there. I was at work. I came back. The horse was dead lame from changing the angle so dramatic. Again, something what Yogi will go in later, not about my horse, but how important it is to look at a balanced hoof. Yogi, this is your slide, so I let you to jump in here and talk about that.
Just go back to your slide quickly. Yes, so if you look at the things from Dr. Kerry Ridgway, and I'm really happy that you brought up Dr. Ridgway, because I actually think that when you look at low heel, high heel, and you look at the effects on it throughout the whole body, it really nicely illustrates how important hoof balance is on biomechanics and on the back. Now, interestingly, you've written here, and from Dr. Ridgway, talks about where is it? The horse compensates by leaning on the low heel side, altering gait and posture. Now, it's really interesting to think about that as a chicken and egg situation, because it's often because of the horse's posture that you get the high-low in the first place. Now, obviously, there is lots and lots of, well, I say lots and lots. So there are different ways that horses can get low heel, high heel. There's studies, obviously looking at foals, grazing patterns, having one leg forward, one leg back. There's a lot of race horses that have it because they go round the track one way all the time. So there's different theories on why low heel, high heel occurs. But that's why I want to look at it as a subject, because I think it really nicely shows the interconnectivity of the hoof balance, how that affects posture and how posture affects it, and then also how that then has biomechanical and structural implications. So you talking about high-low is a great opportunity to lead into the hoof-horse connection that we're going to talk about, the influences of hoof balance on static and dynamic posture, and also structural changes, which we'll look at as well. So if you go on to my next slide now, please. Now, we have to go a little bit backwards before we go deeper into that, for me. And to explore this relationship, we have to have a basic understanding on how domestication itself affects posture. We talked a little bit before about, in the natural state, horses are roaming around, walking around for 23 hours a day with their head on the floor, eating grass and blah, blah, blah. And that's a completely different situation in a domestic setting. Now, I want to start with the top left image that I've got here. Now, this illustrates the effects of sympathetic state. So sympathetic state is the horse is in a sympathetic nervous state. So it's the fight or flight state, right? And the reality is that when we saw Jochen's original slide of the horses in the field and eating their grass, they're in a parasympathetic state. They're in a rest and digest, relax state. But the reality is that for the most part, domestication puts horses into a constant sympathetic state. And because of this, this has an effect on fascia, which is what this image is about, the top left. And then obviously fascia has an important influence on posture. And the point of this slide is that domestication and human intervention create postural issues in the first place. And then what those postural issues create then sets further postural issues. And you'll see why this is all relevant to the discussion in a minute. So I'll go through it step by step. But if we carry on this top left. So the fascia, and I'm not an expert on fascia, but I've done enough looking into it to understand the relationship with hoof balance and such. The fascia is full of nerve endings belonging to the sympathetic nervous system, right? So we talked about the sympathetic nervous system, what it is, and relates to the autonomic nervous system as well, in general, the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Now, because of this, there's a direct and cyclic relationship. I always talk about things in cycles, between emotional state, the hormones associated with stress, which are created by the domestic setting, and fascial tension. I don't know how much Jochen deals and understand and talks about fascia, but hopefully he does a little bit. So hopefully you can go back to this. But the fascial system is closely related with the body's autonomic nervous system. Under sympathetic conditions, okay, so the reality of domestication, the horse's muscles and fascia tension or harden up. This is because emotional and psychological stress creates hormonal changes, in turn affecting fascial tension. And research has implied that sympathetic activation may lead to an increased cellular contraction within the fascial tissue. So it actually creates a physical contraction of the fascia. And so we can't, again, this comes back to not being able to separate things from the bigger picture, because anything that creates sympathetic activation, anything that creates stress in the horse, which is domestication itself, is going to have an effect on its posture, and the posture has an effect on its musculoskeletal system. So that's just to show that we have to look to the bigger picture. And it also, it shows that it's very clear that the psycho-emotional state of the horse also has to be factored into everything that we talk about. So as farriers, as saddle fitters, as physios, as vets, we can't just focus on the feet, the saddle fit, the musculoskeletal system. We have to look at the psychosocial, emotional state of the horse, because otherwise we get caught in these reoccurring cycles. We can also see from this slide things such as dental occlusion, you see in the top right, riding styles in the bottom left. Oh, don't go yet. That's it. And then in the bottom right, you can see just domestication of just and confinement, right? Horses we keep them in confinement. All these things have massive influence on major proprioceptive centers. So next slide. Now, what's important to understand is this cyclic relationship that is then created between changes in posture, which can happen from the domestic setting, hoof balance, and then further changes in hoof balance. So you see here that the domestic setting, the life of the horse and its hoof balance can affect posture, and posture then affects the way the hoof is loaded. The way the hoof is loaded then affects its shape, and its shape then affects posture. Okay, and then this can have a knock-on effect into the general stress of the horse, because posture and stress are then have a relationship there too. So if you go on to the next slide, so you can see the relationship there, and then it works back the other way, because we also important to understand is the cycles between posture and visceral function. So we talked about how the domestic setting and hoof balance affects posture negatively, which affects hoof balance negatively, which then perpetuates poor posture. And then this then has a deeper effect on the visceral system, visceral function, cognitive function, and immune function. And this creates activation of the sympathetic nervous system, which then cements in poor posture even more. Okay, so all of these things are leading to a situation of poor posture. And what we have to understand, as Jochen had in his slide earlier, about the circles of influence, is posture is really starting to emerge as something vital in not just hoof balance, but in musculoskeletal health, and I imagine in saddle fit in general. So next slide, please. Now, Dr. Gelman, I've talked about these guys before. Dr. Gelman and Dr. Shoemaker talk about 3 major areas that humans have influence over that affect the horse's posture. One of them is feed and confinement, which affects dental occlusion and the temporomandibular joint. Hoof balance, of course, which is obviously massively affected by environment and the farrier, and then riding and confinement, which has massive influence on the upper cervical regions, which is also a massive proprioceptive input center. Now, all of these again affect posture. Okay, next slide. Now, how does all of this link into this conversation and the reason why I created this conversation after high-low? Because the high-low and posture can link in quite nicely, because we know in humans that we studied neurodentistry quite in depth in humans, that how our teeth meet is directly responsible for postural changes throughout the body. And the same is true for the horse. Now, what affects dental occlusion in the horse? Well, the domestic setting, what we feed them, where their head position is while they're being fed, and all those other things that affect posture, affect their default posture, and which all affects how their teeth meet. And how their teeth meet affects their posture. So we know that from humans. So if your teeth, your dental occlusion isn't right, then it throws out your whole body, and you can understand how this is going to be the same in the horse and how that can affect that. Now, I'm not going to go into too much depth in this because I went into, or rather, Dr. Gelman went into immense amount of depth on this in her talk that she did with me on dental occlusion and performance. But what I want us to understand here is how, with regard high-low, hopefully I've got the next slide. Yes. So if you look at this chap here, you can see the dental occlusion is rather twisted and off to one side. Now, obviously, this is exaggerated, but many horses, the many domestic horses, will have an offset dental occlusion. And what this does is it affects the way that they load their front feet. So this is an experiment that I do with people when I do clinics. It's much more difficult to do online, but maybe try this at home. Is sit on a chair, relaxed, and then bite your teeth together, and then open your jaw, and then move your jaw from side to side. And what you'll notice is that you will gently sway from left to right as your jaw moves from left to right, because your central nervous system always wants to keep your brain above your jaw and your jaw above your spine to make sure that your brain doesn't come into contact with the ground. This is something that Dr. Gelman talks about all the time. So what happens is when horses have this poor dental occlusion, they will load one front foot more than the other. And when you change the loading of a foot, it changes its shape. And this is how we can very often end up with high-low in horses. And the reason I'm focusing on high-low again is because of it really nicely illustrates, as we will go further on, the knock-on effect to everybody within the industry. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. So what happens when you have high-low? So there's studies now that have shown us that when you have a high-low, you have asymmetrical propulsive forces created by the front feet. So the lower foot will have a higher net braking force. Okay, so what does that mean? So if you're driving your car and you have your brake half on one wheel, on one front wheel, your car is going to pull to one side. And this is the same in the horse. And what the horse has to do, and this is where we start to see kinetic change and compensations for issues in the feet taken up by the spine and the back, which obviously has a knock-on effect there into saddle fit and everything that Jochen is talking about. So what happens in high-low is because you have this asymmetrical propulsive force in front, the horse is always going to be pulling to one side. So what it has to do is it has to stiffen its spine to use contralateral hind limb compensatory movements to maintain a straight line propulsion. And this is the same compensations that happens when you have a lame horse on one front foot. Okay, so they have to stiffen their spine in order to make their compensations. So all the compensations for discomfort, any kind of level of discomfort from hoof imbalance in the front feet or in the hind feet indeed, is taken up by the spine, by the back. This is why we have such a high amount of horses with lameness issues having back issues, because the back is where this compensation occurs. Okay, and we can see this very clearly in high-low. So next slide, please. So if we go back to Dr. Ridgway also talked about the compensation mechanisms that go on with these horses with high-low. And you can see I've put these arrows onto major areas that it affects. He talks about how the horse has to twist its head and neck to keep the eyes level, and the horse has torque and twisting issues at the base of the neck and at the lumbosacral region. Okay, so they often have chiropractic issues here. So these horses, because they're having to make this compensation for always pulling one way, they have this torque issue all the way through their body. And if you go on to the next slide. So here we have a horse with high-low, and you can see this is an even more exaggerated image of what Jochen was showing us earlier. You can see this horse has the low foot on the right-hand side, and look at the asymmetry in the shoulders, and look at the twist in the spine. And you can see there the torque and the effect of the asymmetry of the front feet and how that's affecting obviously biomechanics, but structure. It's actually affecting the structure of the horse. And obviously this phenomenon that you're seeing here with one shoulder way bigger than the other and the twisting of the spine, this is all going to obviously have, I would assume, I'm not a saddle fitter, right, but I would assume has a massive implication for saddle fit. Okay, so next slide. And then if you do a deep dive into high-low, there's a whole series of studies that talk about the massive effects of it. I won't go into them individually, but I've written an article on this. So please, if you want more on that, go and read that article. But here's a kind of deep dive into all the studies that talk about the effects of high-low. But next slide, please. Now, it's important to understand with high-low, well, the question is, what can we do as farriers to help in this situation? Well, first of all, we need to understand there's different types of high-low. Okay, so you can have, in the middle, you've got an ideal hoof, so it's got a straight hoof pastern axis. On the left, you've got a broken forward hoof pastern axis or a clubby foot. On the right, you've got a broken back hoof pastern axis. Okay, so a long toe, low heel, as we'd like to say. The important thing to understand is that as a farrier, the best we can do for the horse is to create the ideal for each foot. Now, it can be very difficult in the club foot because trimming the heels down can have other implications like increasing DDFT tension. But obviously what we don't want to do is change an ideal foot to match a not ideal hoof. But it's important to understand that the farrier can make changes because what we know also is that the greater the difference between the 2 feet, the greater the biomechanical implications. So we want to pair them up as much as we can while maintaining the ideal for each foot. Okay, so next slide, please. So I've got a case here for you. Just bear with me because... Right, so this was a case. I went to a clinic in America, and there was this horse who had all kinds of torque issues in its body, was having lots of performance issues. I've got all the details of those, but I won't bore you with those. But also, the thing that the client reported was that the horse's saddle would never stay still. It was always tipping to one side, and the horse was always struggling to go around one rein, all these kind of things, right? So I was asked to look at the horse, and this horse had high-low. Okay, now this was the low foot. You can see how the low foot presented on the left, and you can see what I did to the low foot on the right. So before we had a low PA of 2 degrees, we had a very broken back hoof pastern axis, and I created a straight hoof pastern axis and a much better PA. But if you look at the next slide now, this was the high foot of the same horse. So you can see that all I really did to that was improve the kind of base proportions and create some mechanics. But if you look at the next slide now, so you can see now, these are the 2 feet after I shod the horse. And you can see now that both feet have a 54-degree hoof angle. Both feet have a straight hoof pastern axis. Both feet have around about a 7-degree PA. So what I did was I created 2 feet that were functionally much more similar. Okay. So this is what we can do as farrier, because these feet are now going to have much less of a difference biomechanically than they did before. And so that horse is going to have much less compensations to make. And who knows what effect that will have on that muscular asymmetry at the top and effects on the back over time. But next slide. But also what this horse had was poor medial-lateral balance. Okay, so now I do a whole talk on understanding the interaction between the hoof and the ground, because obviously the hoof is the point of contact with the ground. So the way that that interacts with the ground is going to have a physiological effect on the whole horse. But just to briefly explain what I did with this particular horse, you can see in the left-hand picture that the base of the shoe was not in the middle of the coronet band. Okay, so what this means is that when the weight of the horse, you can see I've done larger red arrows on the left-hand side. The left-hand side of the hoof is being loaded more by the weight of the horse. So what happens is when that horse moves on a soft surface, that left-hand side of the foot is going to sink into the ground. So that horse is going to always be leaning that way on a soft surface. So it's no wonder why that saddle might well tip to one side. Whereas on the right-hand side, you can see I now matched the middle of the base of the shoe with the middle of the coronet band, and I created a central load through the base. And what that does is going to create even distribution of the weight of the horse along the surface, so that hoof is not going to sink in left or right. Now this was the right fore of this horse. So if we go on to the next picture, this was the left fore of the same horse, and you can see that that the asymmetry was on the same side, so it was like a windswept. Okay, so it was windswept. So both of its feet were sinking into the ground on the right-hand side, and it had a high-low where the right side was the low. So you can start to understand now why everything was pulling to the right, why the saddle was constantly tipping to the right, why this horse had issues with performance. And you can see there that we created balance again there, which the important thing is that horse will now maintain level on a soft surface and won't feel like it's tipping in to the ground. And then after I'd done this, the client expressed after a few weeks that the horse was a completely different horse, was performing like never before. But really, really interestingly and relevant to this talk was that she mentioned that the saddle no longer slipped. So obviously I invite Jochen to talk a bit more about that. But let me check the next slide. I can't remember if I've finished in there or not. No, but so that's back to you. So that's just a nice case there to explain the reason I like to use high lows, because it really shows how the compensations for any imbalance in the feet goes through the whole body, through the back, massively affecting obviously shoulder and spine, and it's going to have a massive impact therefore on what Jochen is trying to do, and not just structurally but also biomechanically as that horse moves, and it's going to have a massive impact on whether that saddle is going to be able and that rider is going to be able to stay in the middle of the horse's back. So I'll pass back to you, Jochen.
Thank you, Yogi. Fascinating, absolutely phenomenal. But that's why you're worldwide known. So I was introduced as a very early stage by my instructor. He was very, very old, but he followed his book written in 1903. The master's name was Udo Berger, and he wrote "The Rider Forms the Horse." You know, it's when you get frustrated as a rider, sometimes you let it out on the horse. And you think, oh, the horse doesn't want to do it, or the horse doesn't do this or that or the other. The fact is, it's a package of three. There's a saddle could be the problem, the horse, the rider, and as we just learned, how important it is that the horse has been corrected or looked at how the horse loads the foot and therefore can be corrected. So if I have a nicely balanced foot, sometimes I have a rider who is not nicely balanced. And that's what you mentioned earlier. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? The fact is, we all need to take accountability to it, because there's so much the saddle fitter can do, so much the farrier can do if you have imbalance yourself. I always challenge my I don't instruct anymore, but my riders, I always had two scales. There's this step on two scales, left foot, right foot, each has a scale. And then as this, close your eyes, swing around, move around, then close your eyes and find your balance. And then unlock both scales. It is incredible how many people are crooked, put more weight on one leg. That goes down to the horse, right? So there's lots of things we as a rider can do to find our inner balance. I'm going to come back to this as well. So I am amazed how many riders sit to one side. And I started earlier by saying there's many reasons, many opinions, but also facts why the horse kicks the saddle 7 out of 10 to the right. Now we saw the presentation just now from Yogi. We heard that first time by veterinarian Dr. Kerry Ridgway. Then we hear from osteopath, the appendix is on the right. That's why we only go to the left in vaulting and racing. Yes, there are some racetrack goes to the right, majority go to the left. And we see a majority of the rider says, I do Pilates, I do everything, but I still go to the right. So as I mentioned earlier, the person knows the how, but always follows the person knows the why. So from all these years, what Yogi has studied, what I have studied, what I have seen around the world, we see professionals who say the reason the saddle is falling one side is because the horse is lame. And like Yogi said, the back has to compensate. It gets stiff. It relates that, oh, the horse has the back pain because of the saddle. Maybe comes from the bottom up. Maybe because the rider sits so crooked. So as we read all the research from various professors, from various experts, we sometimes find it is very hard to keep the saddle symmetrical. Like Dr. Kerry Ridgway wrote, the bigger left shoulder will kick and push the saddle to the right. So obviously, where do I start? Well, I start from the bottom up. And then is it instantly healed? Is it instantly even? Well, sometimes, like I said in the slides prior, bone structure, the horse, it's a survival champion. Well, it will compensate. So if you have uneven bone structure, there's only so much you can do. Sometimes it's a simple way of how I train my horse, and I'm not able to keep the horse, remember I said number 5 in training scale, keep the horse straight, but that keeps bulging out to the right. So if I'm looking at the veterinarian, I'm looking at the Grand Prix trainers, all these facts sometimes leaves the horse with tremendous problems on the back, and then the rider wants to ride. After all, I paid a lot of money for my horse. I have to ride. So, and then I ask myself, why don't the customer, why don't the rider leave the saddle, leaves the horse alone until the horse is completely symmetric? Well, sometimes, as I just mentioned, the horse is not skeletal straight. And sometimes I have to do orthopedic fit, just like we see what Yogi did on the shoeing. That is with the metal, with the hoofs, with shims, or all kinds of skill good farrier has. And the same applies to orthopedic saddle fit, which has been for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it starts with your billets. The majority of the people have no idea why some saddle has 4 or 3 billets. And an inexpensive saddles, it's not even made out of leather, has the ability to change the billets. So I find it sad that we somehow lost the ability for me as a rider to do same thing on the saddle fit, what farriers do on the feet. Why? Why can I not just stop riding and not ride at all? I just wait until the horse is adjusted and absolutely level. Well, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But when I say orthopedic saddle fit, it's not just in the actual billets alignment or billets use, but it's also not in the flocking. We don't want to uneven put pressure there. Then the therapist, the body worker, the farrier never has a chance because the horse's back gets always loaded. Just like Dr. Kerry Ridgway wrote in his article, that bigger shoulder comes. And if that bigger shoulder cannot be corrected, even after shoeing, because of the deformity in the humerus, as I showed you before from recent research, then do I stop riding, or will I ride but open the side without twisting the tree so the saddle stays straight? So of course it would be best to wait forever, but the fact is 9 out of 10 people will keep riding. For many horses, horses are tied to income through lessons, competition, breeding, or sales. So I've seen this over and over. Even for horses who don't earn directly from them, the financial investment is significant. So you have to pay board, training, vet care. So in the end, the people want to ride. Of course, all of you who say, or listen right now, not me, I'm going to wait for half a year or for 3 months or for several times of treatment, then I will ride. Well, I wish that's true. Not you maybe, but the majority don't. So what is the option? What is the option for the people to continue enjoying the horse without amplifying the problem? And that's why we are so passionate about, don't go with misinformation. Don't go with opinions. Base it on facts and base it on science. And Yogi and I, we're so passionate about it. And that's why I created Saddlefit for Life, even though I have many other saddle companies that says, you're stupid, you're giving all your secrets away. I follow my master's advice. He says to me, it takes 3 human lives to learn how to ride. And when we take the horse out of their natural environment and put him in human's activity, it is our duty. It is our duty to teach our friends, our students, the next person what we have learned, so they don't have to learn from the beginning. So, of course, always follow the money. What is the reason why they do it? Remember, the person knows the how, will always follow the person knows the why. Why would people listen to Yogi or to me? Yogi can only touch so many horses. I can only make so many saddles, fit so many saddles. But if we're really passionate about the well-being for horses, by educating people what we have experienced, studied, and learned through our lives, many, many horses will have a better, pain-free, and healthy and sound solution. So in this industry, we do quite strenuous stuff to our horses. Of course, I could show much more prettier horses, but not until this year, the dressage world has seen a massive change when the Germans, and it's hard for me to say it as a German, when the German booed a German when they won. Why? Because the Belgian person rode better, the horse was in harmony, and guess what? Was riding the horse like FEI rules dictated it. And it was a goosebumps moment. He won the European champion and he won in Aachen. Anyway, so I belonged to a club back then called Cinephone. It was created with Klaus Balkenhol, who was the trainer from the British team, dressage team for a long time, and Dr. Gerd Heuschmann. They could not stand anymore how many horses were ridden in a roll cur. I'm not going to go into different styles here. We see in North America the Lane Fox, English or Western. The Western riding also has the cutting, or we have not just horses, also mules, go on to endurance riding, polo, all these different jumpers, trick riding, bareback riding, all these are tremendous stress to the horses. So why am I talking about this? As I said, here are 2 men, they have one dream and they want to empower to prevent to do education. So we offer education to prevent long-term damage or pain and optimize performance. I like this quote a lot, science is the poetry of reality. And that's what we trying to bring across to you guys, that if I sit on a horse and I want to be half my size and a very nice rider, not only do I have my shoulder, hips, and heels, my standing seat. What's a standing seat? When I stand, my weight on my toes, on ball of the foot, is under my sternum. And as an instructor, I have that little cheating line, shoulder, hips, and heels. The difference is standing on your weight, standing, you're carrying your weight on your feet, riding, you're carrying your weight on your seat bones. When I look from the back, we got to go straight. Sit straight is important. So let's dive a little bit more deeper into the science of hoof balance. And Yogi, I pass this mic back to you.
Thank you very much. That was really, really great. Thank you so much. So I, like Jochen, I'm very, very passionate about farriery being evidence-based. And as you saw from that case that I showed, I didn't show that to show off how good I am. I showed it because actually, in reality, I made very simple changes according to research and according to understanding the interaction between the hoof and the ground. And you'll notice as well that everything was measured on those images. And this is another great passion of mine, and I know it's a great passion of Jochen's as well, is about quantifying our interventions and matching them up to what we understand and know as an ideal. And there's so much debate in the industry about whether there is such thing as ideals. But for me, if we aim for an ideal and we miss it by a small amount, then hopefully we are within a working tolerance. But if we just throw away ideals completely, then that's where we end up in seriously pathological situations. And I go around the world and I go around to different yards, and I see people farriers who have just accepted that there are different types of feet and accepted poor feet and this, that, and the other. Nobody documents, nobody measures, and nobody's aiming for something. So I'm very, very, very passionate about that. So I want to talk a little bit here about the ideals that we do know and the importance of understanding how and why those ideals occur or not ideals occur. So we have to understand with hoof balance that, and I'm not going to go into, I can speak for hours and hours on this, so this is going to be brief. And this is what my clinics are in real life and stuff about. But the balance that we see, the dorsopalmar plantar, the medial lateral balance, and the hoof pastern axis is the balance that we see. Okay, so the relationship between the toe and the heel and et cetera, et cetera. That's the balance we see. But we have to understand that the balance we see is affected by balance that we don't see. That how the foot is functioning, for instance, and pressure over time, impulse. These are the factors that affect the balance that we see. And unfortunately, what happens often is that the balance that we see, people try to manipulate that without addressing the balance the imbalance that causes the imbalance in the balance that we do see. So I have spent a lot of time researching, reading the latest papers, understanding how and why the hoof changes shape, and how that shape then affects the interaction with the ground, as you saw in that last case, changing the understanding the interaction with the ground and how that was affecting the biomechanics of the horse. I matched research to the situation and created interventions that allowed for a more comfortable horse. So let's look at this a little bit. So next slide, please. So it's really important to understand. Now, this is where we get a little bit into the barefoot versus shod situation. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit as well, okay? Now, we have to understand that the hoof maintains its shape because of its ability to deform, okay? And because of its ability to disperse shock. So obviously, it's the point of contact between the horse and the ground. When it hits that ground, it needs to be able to disperse shock in order to maintain its shape. So one of the ways it does that is by this natural deformation that we can see in this picture. Next picture. The other way it does it is by the hemodynamic system. Okay, so long story short, the pump at the back of the foot. Now, I go into this in much, much more detail. And the slide I had earlier about understanding the changes in shape from posture. If you want to go into depth in this, I recommend you watch the webinar I did with the hoof architect, where we really delve into understanding hoof morphology. But we have to understand as farriers that there are implications to these natural systems of putting a shoe on the foot. It can affect these natural functions. So we need to understand when that's a problem, when that's not a problem. And when that's a problem, when it's not a problem, depends on the individual horse, and it depends on the individual horse's robustness, if you like, or the architecture of that individual's feet. So if you go on to the next slide, because we have to understand that different feet will have something that's called different elastic strengths, right? So a nice strong foot is going to be able to cope with more than a weaker foot. And our job as farriers is to keep that foot within its elastic limit. Again, I go into this in much, much more depth. But for me, we see so many long toe, low heels, and you saw that in the case before. You saw that long toe, low heel foot was completely collapsed. And it had collapsed because the heels had exceeded their elastic strength. And as farriers, it's really important that we understand how we mitigate the unintended consequences of shoes, how we regain function, because the dorso-palmar balance is a factor of the foot functioning correctly. And whether the foot functions correctly is going to affect the amount of deformation that's going to occur in it. So I'm deliberately keeping this brief because it's too much of a subject to talk about today. But I just want to express how we have to, as farriers, we have to keep up with the research, and that questions some of our practices, questions some of our applications. And once we understand that questioning and understand the mechanisms for hooves failing, we can address those. Now, the reason that the barefoot people like this part is because many of those unintended consequences are due to shoes. However, we have horses with medial lateral balance issues and conformation issues. And when you have those, then, as we saw with that case earlier, you can have asymmetrical hooves as a result of the horse's conformation. When you have asymmetrical hooves, you have a pathological interaction between the hoof and the ground. So let's go on to the next slide. So here you can see this is a barefoot horse, but it is unevenly loading its hoof. Therefore, the hoof is growing wry. And we can understand from that is also going to affect how that hoof interacts with a soft surface. And, you know, most of the time, the importance of what we're talking about today is for horses that are performing on surfaces, right? So that interaction between the hoof and the surface is really, really important, and obviously has a knock-on effect through the whole body, as we saw earlier. And this is the nemesis of the barefoot situation. When you have poor conformation or poor posture, that creates uneven feet like this, where you create wry feet. And when you have wry feet, you have uneven distribution of the ground forces, which we saw in the images earlier. which is going to cause that horse to sink in one side more than the other. Okay, so this is where we then have to add something, create symmetry to create the correct interaction with the ground. So next slide. So I recently wrote a paper with a friend of mine, Uno X Clinton. He's a physics PhD, where we quantified the ideal hoof balance. Okay, so you can go and read that paper. That paper is free to read in my articles on my website. But there is an exact science, which is why documenting and measuring starts to become really important. There is an exact science for creating even ground reaction force distribution on the base of the foot to maintain a level foot on a soft surface. So you can see here, if you have too short a toe, the ground reaction forces are concentrated at the toe, and that toe is going to sink into the ground. If you have a long toe, low heel, the heels are going to sink into the ground. So we need to have the correct proportions. So next slide. Because if we don't, if that toe sinks into the ground every time, then we're going to have suspensory issues. If those heels sink into the ground every time, we're going to have DDFT and SDFT issues. Okay. Now the same rule applies on the medial lateral balance. So next slide. So if we look at the medial lateral balance, and this is what we did in that case earlier, we can define and measure the correct and ideal balance from side to side. And that is when the weight of the horse is met by the pressure point of the surface of the foot. Okay. Now, I understand that this is brief, but so that's why I'm pointing you towards the other papers and the other talks that I do. But as farriers, we need to create the middle situation, because if we have the left or right, that is going to create a horse that is sinking in asymmetrically, which, as we saw before, is going to have a ricochet effect through the whole body and create issues with eventually saddle fit. So as farrier, there is research out there. I've been involved in the research. I've read research that gives us ideals for the farrier to create the optimum interaction with the ground. And in order to do that, we need to start documenting, we need to start measuring, which is why I created Hoof-Map, which is a whole nother talk. I created an app that allows us to measure these dimensions, which you saw on the markups of the images earlier. So I just want to say that it's not a guessing game. And the more research that comes out, the more we understand the balance that we need to be creating as farriers, and therefore the balance that we need to create optimum physiological implications of movement. Next slide, please. So this again takes us back to this one, and you can see the use of Hoof-Map there. I measured to make sure that I created a situation where the base of the shoe was bisected by the weight of the horse. And you can see the before and after and how this is going to affect the interaction with the ground. Next slide. So I want to kind of finish my section with this paragraph, and it kind of lends itself back to the talk I did earlier with the high-low and how the hoof is affecting the whole body. And it's not just in high-low, it's any kind of imbalances in the foot. Anytime that foot doesn't interact with the ground, ideally, it's going to have implications, physiological implications for the body. And again, like we said, a lot of this is taken up by compensations in the back and is going to have an effect on the saddle fitter. So the hoof is the horse's point of contact with the ground. I'm sure we would all agree on that, as long as the horse hasn't fallen over. As such, its shape directly affects the biomechanics of this interaction, and therefore the physiological implications of movement. And the physiological implications of movement are going to have a knock-on effect in terms of structure, muscle development, back compensations, etc., etc. But the other way around as well. Conversely, the hoof is a highly deformable structure between the weight of the horse and the ground. So the hoof is going to change shape according to what's going on above. So if we have a poorly fitting saddle and that changes the way the horse loads its feet, then the feet's going to change shape accordingly, and it's going to create imbalance in the feet. So these two things really are inextricably linked. Everything to do with the horse is inextricably linked. But hopefully this gives you a clear picture as to how the hoof and biomechanics and saddle fit all link in together. So that's I'll hand back to you there, Jochen.
Thank you very much. Absolutely fascinating. And I can only emphasize this is only the top of the iceberg, and so deeper we dive into various topic, you will see how everything interlinks and how important every single step is. And one of the things is what you mentioned, how few of us, farriers or saddle fitters, document and actually study or learn from the past and look at the horse's environment. How are they kept? What type of training? So I want to do a little bit of saddle fit assumptions. There's a lot of people here who talk about saddle fitting, but have different back ideas what saddle fitting actually is. You have the manufacturer and the wholesale and the tack shop. They're fit different than the saddle fitter, the rider, the trainer, the vet, the body workers. So often you say, oh, this saddle needs to go. We have that for a while. Let's put a big sale on it and sell it. And the customer says, does that fit? Yeah, that looks good. Boom, they trust the tack shop or wholesaler, and off that saddle goes. So the customer's point of view always looks from the horse's point of view. Or sometimes the trainer or the rider looks from a different point of view from saddle fitting, such as, oh, I need a saddle fitter because the saddle slides forward. Or I need a saddle fitter because it goes to one side or the other side. Or the stuffing or the flocking is not properly. So they fix the problem going forward or falling to one side, but creates a massive problem. A massive problem. It is very often what every rider wants is how the vet, the body workers, the farriers, the actual horse owner wants the saddle to fit from the horse's point of view. I don't want to create more difficulty by stop the saddle from sliding forward. Now I have 5 more new issues. Right? I want that saddle to fit, like Yogi said, we constantly got to get in balance, not falling forward, not back, and connect with the horse in a sweet spot, which I mentioned earlier. We need to sit over the horse's balance point. So technology has advanced. We have now abilities to measure the horse and the riders via scans. Sure, you can go around with a coat hanger, but for the everyday rider, you have the ability to work with saddle companies or saddle fitters worldwide and get accurate measurements. We have a lot of people who also take a step further. Here you see a veterinarian from New Zealand and dissected a horse Schleese on the side, and puts the saddle on and says, it boggles my mind. How many saddle fitters are still not aware of the distance from D-ring to D-ring? You can see how the vet holds the saddle tree behind the horse's shoulder blade, in the width, which is the distance from D-ring to D-ring, okay, is often too narrow. Then people talk about the tree angle. That would be from the D-ring down to the point. Okay, that has a different angle. So we need to look at saddles and understand how do they need to fit. Just like your riding helmet, it has to fit from the front to the back. The length of the helmet is important. Same with the saddle. The saddle length is important. The width of the helmet is important. Left to right. You don't want to sit the helmet way on top or way on wide and it falls down. And then the side of the helmet. You don't want to dig it in the temples, get a headache, or flare away. And when you ride your sitting trot, that damn helmet sits sideways. So next thing, we see some trees have the tree removed and the sheer metal point is sticking out. And what's between that metal point there is very, very thin leather, the thickness of your sweater, and wool flock, rubber, foam. And then where does it go? Some metal, on the top right picture here, it's pointed forward. So if you look at old army saddles, Western saddles, packing saddles, funny enough, the front of the saddle always bases backwards. Who came up with the idea to point the metal forward into the horse's cartilage? It's beyond me. I don't understand it. But we have also, as I said, the cool idea of measuring the horse's three-dimensional shape with your phone. Also, what happens advanced is that veterinarians now developed pain scale. As I showed you Dr. Sue Dyson slides before, she was also one of the leading scientists who started with the ethogram. Here we see an article where they measure the horse's eye temperature. It's always the same, but if the temperature change, the horse is in pain. You cannot train pain. You can ride a horse until it's numb or deforms, or you can go with science, what you and I try to explain. But we all try, choking up here, we're all trying to do the best for our animals, and we're trying to guide you to listen to the expert. Am I a medical doctor, neurosurgeon, gynecologist? No. So when I follow the history here, and the history has shown that man makes saddles for men for thousands of years, but in the late 70s, the majority of the riders are who? Women. 95% of all riders are women. 75% of all Western riders are women. So when we have a pelvis, which is completely different shaped on the male versus the female, yes, there's 4 different birth channels in the female pelvis, but you're not sitting on your birth channel, you're sitting on your seat bones. So there's 9 different factors between the male and the female, what is an indirect fitting to the way the saddle fits the horse. If the saddle does not fit the rider, it will never fit the horse. And let me explain why. As I said earlier, Udo Berger, 1903, wrote a book, The Rider Forms the Horse. So if you ride in the saddle and the saddle forces your upper legs apart, you're going to compensate by turning your knees and toes extremely out. Doesn't matter how many times I did it to my poor students, female, I grab their thigh and rotate the thigh over, says, that's how your leg has to fit. Just because my thigh has it easier to lay flat on the horse doesn't mean that all female riders in the world need to do it. My first book came out. I went to the University of Zurich and I had a big talk there. And it was fantastic, except one of the professors asked me, says, well, I like everything you said about the saddle fit to the horse, but the saddle fit to rider, it's a little hocus pocus, smoke and mirrors. I says, pardon? Well, I rode with very famous riders, and I believe that most women don't try hard enough. I didn't have anything to say, and thank God the other professor says, we're not here to discuss saddle fit to the rider, we're here to go downstairs and go to the treadmill and see how the horse moves, loads the hooves when the saddle is adjusted differently. Fine. When the lady stand up, she was so deformed. I asked the professor, says, what's wrong with this person? Oh, that's her posture. Just like human compensate when something doesn't work right, horse does the same. Why am I showing you this slide? Am I the expert? No. I follow what my grandmother told me. Surround yourself with experts in a different field who are in relationship of what you do. That's why I'm talking to Yogi. This is what I'm showing you this picture. When a doctor writes the deformity and the chronic long-term damage on the rider is huge, I had to put a patent in 1996 to show how different the female seat to a male seat is. Just like Yogi, I can't go into nitty-gritty detail, but I strongly suggest ask the saddle fitter to take the basic fitting of your saddle. Okay, there's around your pelvis, around your thigh, the biggest part of your thigh, length of your upper leg, length of the lower leg, and then from hip to bottom. These are the basic measurements. And then you see on the bottom right, you see 9 factors, doesn't matter if it's English or Western, which are in relation to those measurements. I actually went to the extreme when a gynecologist came to my shop and says, I have a lot of riders who shouldn't ride. Chronic bladder and kidney infection from a saddle. I says, pardon, I don't believe it. Also, L4, L5, long-term damage from wrong saddles. I don't believe it. So I keep saying I don't believe it because I don't feel it, right? And then also hip and knee damage. And I was thinking, how am I going to address that? How can I feel or make a saddle what I don't have? The pelvis, the thighs, the lower back. So he convinced me to take, this is going back to 1996, to make butt cast. I said, how do you make a butt cast? So anyway, we have a room now which has over 150 different butt casts. You don't have to be a veterinarian, a chiropractor, a gynecologist. You walk in, you see two different shapes. And on the top right, you see exactly what you see on the butt cast. The hip socket on the female is more forward. Hence, the red line on the top right is the female pelvis. It's more forward in the pelvis. And we talk about balance here, right? So the pelvis axis of the male is smack in the center. So when you take a husband and a wife, both starts to ride, who instantly has a better seat? It's always the guy, because we have it so much easier to balance ourselves. Plus, without being rude, we can take our parts, our male parts, left and right, so we don't fall on top of it. Ladies cannot put her parts to the left and right. What has that to do with Saddlefit? Well, if you don't balance the rider will compensate, lean to the side, lean to the back. Furthermore, I don't care how tall, how small you are, how young, how old you are. The fact is, every male pelvis has a longer tailbone and a lesser arc in the back. Every female has a shorter tailbone. So when you sit balanced, back to this magic word balanced, the first impact on the female pelvis is your pubic symphysis. Your seat bones are far, far away. First impact on the male pelvis to the horse's back is the seat bones because of the shape of the pubic branches on the body, on your pelvis. Now, I didn't make it up, and I for sure didn't like all this news I heard, because I was taught by a master, he was taught by a master, and his master taught his master. We pass our experience on. But when we don't understand, the reality here is the majority of the rider are women. And if I, as a rodeo rider, as a pleasure rider, as a male rider, ride with women underwear, it's not going to happen. And that's just soft cloth material, because my parts have no room to go to the left or right. We even put in the saddle a little peak to push the male's part up. There's not a single female who rides and wants to ride on the peak to hurt herself, soft parts or bony parts. So if I have to compensate to move around, I have a lot of problems. So my starting point, okay, doesn't matter if you start from the bottom or you start from the top. We can do a lot as a rider. For example, I work together with Eva Simmons, a very, very interesting program he has. There's many times where I see the saddle, fits beautiful, the horse, great legs, but the rider has no stability. Totally stiff, no strength, no stamina. Riding is a sport, and unfortunately, often we cause this big problem. What saddles should you buy? Today there is many, many, many saddles. And my saddle is adjustable. Careful with that statement. Work with people together, and this is what we do with Saddlefit for Life. We have different courses, different articles. I've surrounded myself with people who are expert in myofascia. I have surrounded myself expert with failures. All of the above, what I showed you earlier in the circle of influence. So we can give the best advice to everybody out there. So when you go to a saddle fitter, make sure the saddle fitter first. Watch the horse on the lunge line. How does a horse even move without any equipment? Look from the bottom up. What do the hoofs look like? What the leg look like? Where's the environment? Watch them ride in their own saddle. What type of riding style are they? Are they crank and spanker? Or do there are riders who are a little bit more harmonious? What discipline? So my suggestion for you, you want to have a saddle, what can be adjusted by your saddle fitter, the tree angle independent from the tree width and vice versa, the tree width independent from the tree angle. The saddle needs to be compensated. If I need to make that tree wider on the metal on the left, that so be it, because sometimes I balance the feet, but the deformity is in the humerus or the muscles or in the body. Or if I talk to a person who is really, really understandable and says, well, I see a lot of horses with colics, with ulcers, and they blow out to the right. The hoof, the soft tissue, the bone structure is always softer. It's always softer than the shoeing on the bottom or the metal on the top. So if we have to compensate because the rider doesn't want to wait until the rehab is completely done, or the rehab is completely done and everything has been done, but the horse's body is what it is, like the team vet in UK eventing explained, they're really, really good. They're just uneven. I mean, we have uneven faces, our organs uneven in our body. Same with the horse, right? So strongly recommend that you have a saddle that can be adjusted orthopedically. Learn the billets, what's already very, very big subject over 100 years ago to the soldiers. The channel clearance, the spinal clearance is important. The panel length was a big debate. Oh, you know, Western saddles are much longer than English saddles, so you can go ahead and they can be a little longer. Well, little people know that the Western saddle in the front has a flare. Flare means no contact. Same in the back. Flare, no contact. That's just for putting your guns, your packing tape, your rope, your kitchen, whatever. You know, you want a panel what can be increased or decreased in weight-bearing surface. And we want to have, of course, front to left with the clearance, the shifting, got to be rotated without creating additional problems. Anyway, this is just the tip of the iceberg. And our suggestion is educate yourself. I have published 2 books in many different languages. And Yogi's and mine dream, 2 men, 1 dream, is educate riders and horse lovers to prevent pain and long-term damage. So we encourage you to sign up on the and become a multiplier to help and protect the horses out of pain and discomfort by learning to balance the horse and rider. So on-site online education from Yogi Sharp and myself. Yogi, it was a pleasure to do this with you. I was absolutely delighted, and thank you very much for having me on your webinar.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. Mate, you want to turn your video back on for a minute so we can have a quick chat. So, I mean, it's absolutely fascinating stuff. It's I'm very, very new to the understanding of Saddlefit. I understood the importance of it, but you know, you've shown me quite clearly there how complex it is and how accurate it needs to be. And obviously, all this stuff you're measuring, right? You're measuring for the individual horse, and I can see, you know, the importance of that, and it just backs up the importance of documentation and measurement in general for all the professions, and that's what I'm extremely passionate about. And that was the reason behind my creation of Hoof-Map, was because of being able to measure the complexities. But that's I had no idea how many different moving parts there were to a saddle and what's got to be right, and so that was a great learning thing for me. So thank you so much for that. Do we have any questions? Anybody want to ask any questions? Just chuck them in the chat now. We'll have some questions.
While we're waiting for the questions, Yogi,
Yeah.
one of the things is what I mentioned earlier, pictures say more than 1,000 words. And by doing what you and I do and surround ourselves and keep asking the question why, you know, I feel sometimes we're just on the tip of the iceberg. We look into this, oh my God, I had no idea how much that all came together. When I met, God, what's the tip of my tongue? I'm going to come back to her name in a minute. Catalina Pearson. She worked in the UK, in North America, in United Emirates, and now she is based in South Africa. She's a Grand Prix show jumper, and she has done many, many dissections. What I have learned and looked at the bones, I've said, God, this is like CSI saddle fitting. She could tell me, based on the deformity on the shoulder blade, how many horses have problems. I mean, if you think about it, if you take a hammer and you hit your chin, your leg, it hurts crazy, right? But you will have a bump there. Bone heals bump. Bone grows bone to heal it, right? So she showed me this here. How many horses have this bump here? And I seen, must have been over 50 different skeletons. And she says, oh, this is a typical jumper. Here you know why. This is where the tree angle was wrong, but the tree width was right, or vice versa. So the bone deformity, this is not normal, this what our point here. What I'm trying to say is, can we not X-ray? Well, no MRI or X-ray can go into the shoulder. But what we can do is have simple ways of what the sergeant told the soldier. They're following the map of the horse's back. And I love that, and then I find old handbooks again. Back then when the horse was important to us to survive and conquer, we didn't do opinion-based. We did something what actually worked, and we listened to the horse. That's what I like about the horse industry, or the horse, I should say. The horse will tell you most of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting you say that, because there's so many parallels in. I've done lots of talks now talking about how, like, the modern sport horse. I did a talk with Martina Neidhart, and she talked about how the horse was 100 years ago versus how the horse is now.
Right.
And actually, we had it much better in general 100 years ago than we do now. It's very, very strange. And a lot of that was also to do with things like the fact that our horses had 6 months off to be horses and reset. So there's so many aspects to the picture, isn't there, of creating a healthy horse, which is why I love this platform, because I have so many different people, from ethologists to dietitians to saddle fitters to physio, and every single time I see how everything is so closely interlinked, and I just absolutely love that. And hopefully, as an industry, we can start to recognize that we have to get the big picture correct, not just our little thing. So let's have a look at some of the questions. So let's have a look. Who would you recommend? Do you work with anyone for human postural evaluation and intervention, Jochen?
Yes, we trying to work together with people who do training for the rider, and there are many, many, many. Right now, we're working with a lady. Her name is Allison. Oh God, she's going to kill me. I don't remember her last. I showed you a clip from Eva Simmons. I worked with him a couple of times. So there's more and more people who do work with training the rider. I started off when I was invited to the National Riding School in Germany. There's also where the Olympic Training Center is, and I met a professor by the name Dr. Eckhard Meiners. He taught at the University of Lüneburg for 25 years about how the body of a human works in different disciplines. His wife being a rider, that was number one. So he taught at the German National Riding Center, and we became very, very good friends. And he says, we cannot, what you used to do as a trainer, deform the rider's body and tell you that's how it has to lie. We have to understand how the joints work. And he wrote many books, Dr. Meiners, still available, unfortunately has passed. But there's a lot of young upcoming body workers around there, and it depends where you live, where you listen to it. I find it, there's online application and there's of course on site, and look it up in your area, you will find a lot.
Perfect. Somebody's asked, what tech app is used on a phone to measure backs and discern discrepancies? You know anything of that?
Okay, so there's approximately 5 or 6 companies who developed scans for the horse. The one I became very good friends of is Andreas Rieser. He developed this with his uncle, Christopher Rieser, a long, long time ago. They have made a lot of different saddle devices for the topographer. It's a device you put over the horse's back. He got the idea from Andy Foster, who had sort of a wooden mechanical thing where all the pins dropped. And then as technology moved on, they had the horse on the treadmill scanning it. Dr. Martin from the UK done it several times. So there's lots of scanners on it. What I like about horse shape is that it doesn't matter where you live, you can take the measurements of your horse, you take the measurement, they give you a QR sticker, and then you send it to the saddle fitter or saddle manufacturer you like to work with. They then, here comes the best part, they then get the information and they pay for it. For the consumer, it's free. Because his motto is, make it as easy as possible to connect the consumer with experts who have learned on the device, and lots of manufacturers, including us, are gearing more towards it. In terms of human, you can measure your saddle from the top and the bottom to see how these measurements fit. From terms of measuring the human, there are mostly in the textile. I had tried it myself. I couldn't believe it. It was second how it measured me. And then in 3 weeks, I had a custom-made suit, whatever I wanted. So technology moved on. It's not like you and I just talk as if we sit next door or next table. So in a horse industry, the same thing, because I always say, look at the eyes, the ears, the mouth, they don't lie. And we have now Dr. Sue Dyson come up with the ethogram. I got the gait analysis, thermography, heart monitor. If I really have a student or I have somebody who really doesn't get the concept, then I says, well, why don't we look at data? You use thermography on your platform when the foot step on, right? They've done that for me, for measurement, computerized saddle pads. I remember that when I was at university in Cambridge in England, we had a dummy horse and we fitted a saddle to it, fitted perfect. We put a different rider on. Look at that. How come the rider, who's the female, is like 30 pounds lighter than the guy, but sits harder in that saddle in the back? Well, as I showed in my slide, if you hit your crotch, your subconsciously says, oh, maybe I lean back a little bit. And now your disc goes bye-bye. But the horse feels it first. So I am from Missouri, the show me state. I didn't even believe anything. But when I see that data, like what you did with the hoof map is phenomenal. So a long-winded answer to a short question. There's a lot of scans.
Yeah. Brilliant. Perfect. Well, so there's a question here for me. Have I found any particular breed or regional horses that statistically have a close to ideal set of hooves? Okay, so I have actually found that, so there's a bit of a misconception as to whether particular breeds have better hooves. Now, obviously, lots of people say that thoroughbreds have poor feet, right? However, in my opinion and in my experience, thoroughbreds need their feet to be functioning optimally in order to maintain their shape, because they have a very low elastic capacity, a very low elastic maximum. Okay, so they are more likely to fail than a warm blood's foot, for instance, because they have more robust anatomy. But if you look after the thoroughbred foot with that in mind, understanding that it needs to have different intervention in order to maintain its shape, then I've found, certainly in my books, there's no difference between the thoroughbred and the warm blood and in terms of the ability to achieve the ideal. So hopefully that answers that question. It comes down to understanding the anatomy that you're dealing with and the forces at play that are going to cause that foot to fail, and mitigating those forces correctly for the individual. So,
okay. I have one more question and then I have to run.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, I mean, this is a great question. I've shortened it, but how can I, as a layman, tell if my saddle fit is doing a good job?
My answer is always the same. Get a pencil, or better, get one of those pens. If you can't afford one, go to the hotel next time and take one. They're always there. Look how soft they are. They're bendable. So we teach every rider in the world to do the pencil trick. You probably have learned and listened and saw it in books. Oh, you lift up the saddle, put your hand underneath the panel, and you feel with your hands. Well, the problem is that we have uneven fingers. And most people never know, what am I feeling here? Oh, that goes hard. They can't, if they don't feel what a saddle fitter feels, because it's the first time you do it. But here's the fun part. If you do that with a pen, so I'm going to take the saddle here. Okay. You lift up the flap, English or Western, same thing. And you put that pen where the stirrup bar is, okay? And you hold it just on 3 centimeters. And then you slide it through it. Very, very gentle. Very gentle. You do that 3 times. And you will see, of course, both sides. And you will see it goes like this. And then you can't even move it. Whoa! Guess what? The saddle doesn't even have a saddle pad on. It's not even girthed on. The rider's not even on. The sheer contact, the loose laying on top, loose, not girth on. You feel already massive injury. Or it goes like this. You can't even move it. You can't even move it. The middle is so overstuffed. And then you come where the flap ends. All of a sudden, the rest of the saddle, the pen just flies out. So this is so easy. You're doing it 3 times each side and you get a very good idea. But more important, it's the front. And this is, I'm glad we had that question. If you look where the scapula looks, okay, the scapular widest part, it's most of the time the highest withers. Okay, certain breeds not. But every rider can stand in the neck, look towards the back, says, oh, there's the largest bulge. Okay, you find the largest bulge of the horse. And as you see, the height of the scapular sits not to the top of the mane, it sits a little lower. So here's an old soldier's trick. Okay, we used our hands back then. We even say, oh, that horse is 14.3. What does that even mean? Well, 1 hand is 4 inches, 3 is 3 inches. So saddle fitting, you can do easy by the hands. But because we have majority of the riders now, children, but women, that's not anymore 4 inch. So they went to a pen. The pen trick, what you do, you lay that pen on the top of where the mane is. Doesn't matter if the mane goes left or right. The highest point, the wither is where the shoulders is the widest. This is the key point here. Then you flip it over. Okay. How long? Can it be a marker? Can it be this? Can it be this? Normal pen, nothing. You see this? Nothing. Flexible. So you lay it on the shoulder. Where will you end up? You end up at partially on the cartilage, on top of the scapula is the cartilage, and below the spine of the shoulder blade. Okay. Now, when the horse rotates, that has to be parallel with the tree angle. From 14 saddle fitting schools, the majority teaches the tree angle, the metal plate, has to be parallel to the shoulders. That's what you see in every veterinarian journal written when they talk about saddle fitting, any research. Unfortunately, some people fit to the wither angle, which is much flatter than the shoulder angle. Here's what I challenge everybody. Have a friend lead your horse, sit on the horse bareback. Scoop a little bit back, close your eyes, put your hands on the shoulder, look up. Just feel how the shoulder moves. And you will see that scapula has a lot of movement. So that shoulder is coming towards the saddle. So if you have a saddle, okay, what does not fit the angle, we have problems. If it's too wide, the cartilage will bend over and damage. We want the same angle. So back to the pen. All you need to do is put it on the mane, flip it over, and then you push on the middle. You don't want to push on the cartilage, on the tissue, just flat against it. Everybody can do it. Hold the finger there, hold the pen there. Get your friend, get your saddle. English, Western, doesn't matter. Where your vertical panel starts, okay, there's the starting point. Put the pen on the vertical panel. Have the saddle on the horse. Stand in front of the horse, look at 3/4 from the neck view. Do these pens line up or not? That's the easiest way how you can learn it with the pen. Very straightforward. You learn it very fast. Takes you 3-4 times to really figure out to hold it. I get it. Okay. But that's a very easy way to see. Does the tree angle works? Does it have a full panel contact? I could go in 9 more, but those are the 2 more important parts.
Perfect. Yeah, well, thank you very much. Okay, well, we will respect your the fact that you have to go. So thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the talk. And maybe if people have got more questions, if you all send in your questions, maybe Jochen and I will do a follow-up or something, but we'll see. But thank you so much, Jochen. I've really enjoyed that. It's always lovely to speak to someone of the same mindset. It's so refreshing. So thank you so much, and we'll speak again soon.
Take care. Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on social media. You can find us under Saddlefit for Life. If this conversation really resonated with you and you'd like to become an advocate for horses, helping us facilitate change in the equine industry through evidence-based practices, we'd love to connect with you. You can book a no-obligation discovery call with us using the link under this video. On the call, we're going to talk about your background with horses, your goals, and how our program can help you achieve those. Whether you're looking to start a career as an equine professional or to enhance an existing equine business, whether you're a body worker, a trainer, a vet, or any other equine professional, our programs are designed to support you every step of the way. Click the link below to book your call. We're excited to speak with you and explore how you can make a real impact for horses. Regardless of whether you take me up on that offer, make sure to check out the next episode of this series. Happy riding!